Hey, 7th graders, Mr. Eller again, another one of your flip lessons. Today we're going to be talking about the history of the Erie Canal. That's going to be placed into our interactive notebook on page 6. So what we're going to do is we've got a little bit of notes, then we've got a timeline underneath. Make sure when you're cutting and taping this into your interactive notebook that you're not kind of cutting them as two separate things. Just cut off the top, cut off the bottom, keep it as one page, keep it simple. Remember, kiss your interactive notebook, keep it simple, silly. As always, you're going to fill in the blanks on all of the different notes. So make sure where there's a blank and it's underlined, that underlined portion goes to blank and follow along. Should be relatively easy peasy. Here we go. All right, so first of all, history's definition is the study of the past. So what does that mean? Honestly, as a historian, the historians don't really just study the past in general. Okay, so what we're kind of talking about today is going to be a big theme, and then the rest of the week is going to be kind of little parts of that theme. So yes, a historian is studying the past, but they're typically not just going to say, this happened on this time, at this point, etc. So as we look at the Erie Canal, what we're really going to look at is how these different types of historians might research the canal. Because a lot of people say, well, I don't really like history. But they may like geographical history. They may like political history. They may like social history. They may like some sort of other type of research that can lead to a like of history. But history at its general purposes, if we're saying we're going to study the history of the past of the Erie Canal, we're going to look at what happened, why it happened, how it happened, etc. in one of those different lenses. Let me get down here. So what do we mean by buzzwords? Okay, these are words that make you think about history. So general termed history buzzwords are going to be things like primary and secondary sources, and we're going to talk about them probably into next week. We need to know the difference before them. As a historian, you're going to be working mostly with primary sources, sources from the time period and about the time period. Those are things like letters, journal entries, even today, videos on Facebook, videos on Twitter as something happens can be a primary source. Secondary source, real simple, create after the event. Big one that we used to use, not used a lot in these classes, in our classroom, is going to be a textbook. You hear things about time and date. The Erie Canal was built in 1817 to 1825. That's going to be a historical reference. Okay, events, eras, Civil War era, Erie Canal era, Revolutionary War era, different time periods. Those are all going to be things that as soon as you hear these terms, it's going to automatically lead you to thinking, oh, this is going to be focused on history. All right, so let's look at the Erie Canal timeline, because a lot of people think, oh, Erie Canal built 1817, 1825. That was when people were interested in it. No, 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 no. We've got letters and things like that we found dating back all the way to 1786. All right, almost, let's see, about 40 years before the actual building canal, talking about the need for some sort of canal. And the reason for that being land travel sucked really up until the 1950s of this relative era. So in 1796 they tried to create a law to kind of look into creating a canal. That failed. It did not pass the New York State government at all. They didn't have the votes. But around the mid-18 teens, 1815, 1814, this guy by the name of DeWitt Clinton, he's the son of a former New York State governor, and that New York State Governor George Clinton was also very influential in the founding of our country. He kind of goes around the state and he thinks that this is the big thing that's going to help New York State, is building this canal. And so he gets a petition that's signed by thousands, and you can see kind of part of it there. That would be an example of a primary source. The government is kind of very impressed by this and brings up the law again, and this time it passes. So in 1816, we've got a law that says it's going to incorporate and allow companies and allow different entities to build a canal that is going to go from the west, Lake Erie, to the Hudson River in the east and connect those two bodies of water. I am all in the way of this picture. So Erie Canal starts to get built in 1817, and it is a slow build. One of the reasons it's such a slow build, we don't know how to do it. There's not a single engineer in the United States. There's no engineering schools. We're building it completely different in Albany, Rome area than we are in the Buffalo area, than we are in the Rochester area. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the geography of it. But first year, only 15 miles are built. By year 2, we've got about another 96 miles of the canal complete, and we're starting to use it in different sections. Really, the part that gets built the fastest is that eastern part between Rome, New York, and Albany, New York. By 1821, we've got 180 miles of canal built. We're getting all the way to Rochester, and we're starting to see boat travel from Rochester, New York, all the way to Albany. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and kind of our social and economic impacts of kind of how that impacted the country. But right in the back of our neighborhood in Rochester, New York, this Erie Canal is going to have a profound effect on the history and development of our area. And you can kind of see some of the building going on in the back there. So by 1825, almost about 8 years from the beginning, and remember, we're only building during the summer because of winter it's real cold. The Erie Canal is finished. DeWitt Clinton at this time is governor. He kind of runs for election in 1817. He wins. He loses in 1821. He wins again in 1825. And it's finished not just from Rochester to Buffalo, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. Or the rest of the way from Rochester to Buffalo. That's what I meant. That western part took the longest, and we'll talk about that in our geography portion. In the first year alone, 13,000 boats used the canal. One of those boats, the first boat to go from Buffalo all the way down to New York City, is DeWitt Clinton's boat. You can see the ceremony there where he took some water from Lake Erie and dumped it into New York Harbor. 10 years after the Erie Canal was built, it is paid for and is starting to make a profit by tolls. This becomes really the most transported body of water in the East, connecting the West and the East, and is going to have a profound impact on New York State and a profound impact on the United States as well. All right, but that's our flipped lesson for today. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about the history of the Erie Canal, kind of when we get into class, and what this history kind of would look like as we go throughout the different parts of what we're going to study in history class. But all right, that's it for today. Gather it out.